After my grandparents passed away, I inherited $26 million. My parents demanded every cent. When I refused, everything shattered. Stay with me as I share what happened, and if my story reaches your heart, I'd be grateful if you supported our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with people you care about. When I think of love and family, the first faces that come to mind are not my parents, but my grandparents, Walter and Helen Reynolds. They raised me in all the ways that mattered. My parents, Diane and Robert, were always busy chasing money, social parties, and the kind of life that looked perfect on the outside but felt empty on the inside. Walter and Helen, on the other hand, gave me bedtime stories, warm meals, and the kind of hugs that made the world feel safe. I grew up in libraries and gardens with my grandparents, learning the quiet beauty of books and the gentle lessons of patience and kindness. It's no wonder I became a librarian. It was the life they inspired me to live. To me, they weren't just grandparents. They were the true parents I never really had. When they passed away, my heart broke in a way I can't fully explain. Walking into the lawyer's office for the reading of their will, I didn't expect anything other than memories. I thought perhaps they'd leave me something sentimental, like Helen's locket or Walter's old watch. I never imagined my whole world was about to change. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled some papers, and then spoke the words that stunned the entire room. Everything, the house, the land, the savings, the investments, was being left to me. $26 million. I remember staring at him, thinking I had misheard. My parents' faces turned pale first, then red with rage. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had never thought about money like that. I didn't even know how to think about it, but my parents did. Their eyes lit up like predators spotting prey. Diane leaned forward immediately, her voice sharp. Of course, Sophia will do the right thing and hand it over to her family. Robert nodded in agreement, adding, "You don't need this money. We'll manage it better. Family wealth should stay with us." I sat there frozen, my hands shaking under the table. This wasn't joy or celebration. It was pressure, heavy and suffocating. My parents didn't even ask how I felt. They didn't mention Walter or Helen, or the love that had filled those years. All they cared about was the fortune left behind. When I softly said, "No, it was their wish for me," their expressions twisted. Diane's lips curled as if I had insulted her. Robert slammed his hand against the armrest, muttering under his breath. I realized, in that moment, that the little bit of family I thought I had left was slipping away. That was the day everything changed. I had gained an inheritance, but lost the illusion that my parents ever truly loved me. When I was little, I used to sit by the window waiting for my parents to come home from their parties or business dinner. Most nights, they didn't bother. My grandmother Helen would tuck me in, humming softly while Grandpa Walter read me fairy tales in his deep, steady voice. They were the ones who came to my school plays, clapped at my piano recitals, and cheered when I got good grades. Diane and Robert, my parents, always seemed too busy, or maybe just uninterested. It's strange how clear those memories are now. The forgotten birthdays, the missed parent-teacher conferences, the way my parents introduced me as if I were a nuisance rather than their daughter. But Walter and Helen? They never let me feel unloved. They became my real family long before the will was ever read. After that day in the lawyer's office, when I told my parents I wouldn't give up what my grandparents had chosen for me, the mask they had worn for years finally cracked. Diane's voice softened, dripping with fake sweetness as she whispered, "Sophia, family comes first. Don't be selfish. Your grandparents would want us all to share this." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. Walter and Helen had lived their whole lives watching Diane and Robert chase money and status. They knew exactly what they were doing when they left everything to me. I tried to stay calm. Grandma and Grandpa wanted me to have this. It's not about greed. It's about honoring their wishes. Robert's eyes turned hard like cold glass. "You're tearing this family apart. If you cared about us, you'd sign it over." His words cut, not because they were true, but because I could finally see how little I mattered to him. The guilt came next, heavy and relentless. Phone calls at midnight. Long messages about loyalty and duty. Diane weeping dramatically, saying, "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I wanted to scream back that they hadn't done anything, that it was Helen who made me birthday cakes and Walter who sat beside me through storms. But instead, I just listened in silence, my heart sinking lower with each passing day. And then came the whispers. My cousins stopped calling. My uncles avoided me at family gathering. When I reached out, their replies were stiff and cold. Slowly, I pieced it together. Diane and Robert had been spreading lies, that I had manipulated Walter and Helen in their old age, that I had tricked them into leaving everything to me. The betrayal stung deeper than anything else. These were people who had once smiled at me, shared meals with me, sent me holiday cards. Now they looked at me like I was a thief. I would see it in their eyes whenever I walked into a room, the doubt, the suspicion. That was when I understood. My parents didn't just want the money. They wanted to ruin me completely if I dared to stand in there, and I was only beginning to see how far they would go. The days after the will reading turned into weeks of endless pressure. My phone never seemed to stop buzzing. Diane's voice filled my voicemail almost every night, swinging between begging and threatening. Sophia, answer me. You can't keep ignoring your family. Then, a few hours later, another message, her tone sharp as glass. If you think you'll get away with this, you're wrong. We won't let you destroy everything we've built. Robert wasn't much different. His calls were short, angry, and meant to scare me. You think you're stronger than me? You'll regret this. Sometimes, he would hang up before I could even respond, leaving me shaking in my quiet apartment. It wasn't just them. Slowly, I noticed how the rest of the family started slipping away. My cousins stopped inviting me to dinners. My uncles avoided my texts. I could tell Diane and Robert had been busy poisoning their ears with lies. At first, I tried to explain, tried to tell them that Walter and Helen made their own choice, but no one wanted to listen. It was easier for them to believe my parents' version of the story, that I was some greedy manipulator who stole an inheritance. The loneliness was crushing. Family gatherings that used to feel warm were suddenly cold and hostile. The people I once trusted now looked at me like a stranger. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had turned so quickly. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about being painted as the villain in a story I never asked to be part of. The only person who stood by me through it all was Lily Hayes, my best friend since college. She was the kind of friend who didn't sugarcoat anything, but always had my back. The first time she saw me breaking down, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, arms crossed, and said, "Sophia, stop letting them walk all over you. They don't care about your feelings. They care about control." I sniffled into my tea. "But they're my parents." Lily leaned forward, her voice firm. "No, they're people who happen to be your parents. There's a difference. Real parents don't threaten their children for money." Her words stuck with me. Every time my phone lit up with another cruel message, I heard Lily's voice reminding me of the truth. She reminded me that Walter and Helen had chosen me for a reason, that I wasn't weak, and that giving in would only feed their hunger. As the days dragged on, I started to see it more clearly. My parents weren't just greedy. Greed is one thing. It fades when you get what you want. But this was darker. They wanted power, control, complete obedience. And if they couldn't get it, they were willing to destroy me. That realization settled deep in my chest like a stone. This wasn't just a family argument. It was a war, and I was right in the middle of it. It was a gray Saturday morning when the pounding on my apartment door started. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound made my stomach twist. When I opened it, there stood Diane and Robert, dressed sharply as if they had just come from some important meeting. Their expressions were cold, determined, and without a trace of warmth. Before I could even ask why they were there, Robert shoved past me into the living room, holding a thick folder under his arm. Diane followed closely behind, her perfume filling the air like a cloud I couldn't escape. "We're not here to argue," Robert said, though his tone was anything but calm. He placed the folder on my coffee table and flipped it open. "These are transfer documents. You're going to sign them, and this whole mess will be over." My hands shook as I looked down at the neatly typed pages, legal language I barely understood staring back at me. It was clear what they wanted, everything my grandparents had left me. I swallowed hard. "I'm not signing anything." Diane gasped, as if I had just confessed to a crime. She sank onto the couch, pressing a hand dramatically to her chest. "Sophia, do you hear yourself? This money isn't just yours. It belongs to all of us. To the family. You're tearing us apart by being so stubborn." Her voice cracked in all the right places, tears gathering at the corners of her eye. But I had lived with her long enough to know when she was performing. This was no breakdown. It was a carefully rehearsed act. Robert leaned closer, his jaw tight, his eyes burning into me. "If you resist us, consider yourself disowned. Don't come to us for help. Don't call yourself our daughter. You'll be nothing to us." For a moment, the words sliced through me like a knife. A part of me wanted to shrink back, to apologize, to make it all stop. But another part, the part my grandparents had nurtured with love and kindness, rose up stronger than before. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You can threaten me, you can cry all you want, but I won't go against Grandma and Grandpa's wishes. They left it to me. That was their choice. And I won't dishonor them." The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. Diane's tears stopped instantly, her face twisting into anger. Robert snapped the folder shut, his movements harsh. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. They stormed out of my apartment, the door slamming so hard behind them that a picture frame rattled off the wall and hit the floor. I stood there in the quiet, heart pounding, realizing what I had just done. For the first time, I hadn't bent under their pressure. It was terrifying, but it was also the first real taste of freedom. The betrayal came on an ordinary afternoon. I I was sorting books at the library when a man in a gray suit approached me. He asked for my name, and when I nodded, he handed me a thick envelope before walking away without a word. My hands trembled as I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. Legal papers. My parents were suing me. The words blurred as I tried to make sense of them. They were accusing me of manipulating Walter and Helen, my grandparents, the only people who had ever truly loved me. According to the documents, I had pressured them into leaving me everything, taking advantage of their old age and fragile health. I sank into a chair, the library suddenly too quiet, too suffocating. My parents weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were dragging me into court, willing to destroy me publicly. Tears welled in my eyes, but beneath the heartbreak, a slow anger began to burn. When the first court session came, I walked in hoping reason would win. But the moment I saw familiar faces lined up against me, my chest tightened. Cousins I had grown up with, uncles who had once ruffled my hair at family barbecue. They were all there, repeating the lies Diane and Robert had fed them. She was always close to Walter and Helen, one cousin said on the stand, his voice cold. Too close. It seemed unnatural, the way she always had their attention. Another uncle added, they were old, easily influenced. It wouldn't surprise me if Sophia convinced them to change their will. Each word hit me like a punch to the gut. These were people who knew how much my grandparents had loved me, who had seen them at every holiday, every family gathering. And yet, they chose to believe the story that painted me as some greedy manipulator. I wanted to scream, to shout that none of it was true. But all I could do was sit there, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. After that day, I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. That was when I met Marcus Lane. My friend Lily had recommended him, describing him as a man who didn't just know the law, but believed in justice. When I stepped into his office, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Marcus was sharp, calm, and direct. He listened to every detail, his eyes steady on mine as I poured out the nightmare I was living. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "They think they can bury you under lies, but the truth leaves a stronger trail than they realize. We're going to fight this, Sophia, and we're going to win." In that moment, I felt a shift inside me. My parents had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but I wasn't going to let them take away the love and trust Walter and Helen had left behind. With Marcus on my side, I was ready to fight back. The courtroom felt colder than I ever imagined. As I sat at the long wooden table beside Marcus, my parents took their place across from me, their faces hard, almost triumphant. For them, this wasn't just about money. It was about breaking me down until there was nothing left. The opening arguments set the tone. Diane's lawyer stood tall and declared that I was unfit and undeserving. He painted a picture of me as a manipulative granddaughter who had taken advantage of two elderly people for my own gain. I listened in silence, nails digging into my palms under the table, my heart aching at how easily my parents had turned me into a villain. When it was our turn, Marcus's voice rang firm and steady. He placed a stack of journals and letters on the judge's bench. "These are the writings of Walter and Helen Reynolds," he said, his eyes sharp. "They show not only their intent, but the depth of love and trust they had for their granddaughter, Sophia." The courtroom grew quiet as he handed me one of the letters to read aloud. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, Helen's familiar handwriting staring back at me. My voice wavered at first, but I forced myself to speak. "My dearest Sophia, you are the light of our lives. You've cared for us in ways no one else ever has. When the time comes, we want you to have everything, not because of wealth, but because you will use it to build, to love, to give. We know you will honor us in ways no one else would." By the time I reached the last line, tears blurred my vision. My voice cracked, and I had to stop, pressing the letter to my chest. The judge nodded gently, giving me a moment. Across the room, Diane's face was unreadable, though I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. The days stretched into weeks, each session wearing me down further. Old friends of my grandparents came forward, speaking about how often Walter and Helen talked about me. One woman, Mrs. Jennings, told the court, they used to say Sophia was their pride. They wanted her to carry on their legacy, not anyone else. Her words gave me strength, like a hand reaching out in the dark. Still, the constant attacks from my parents' side chipped away at me. They brought in so-called experts who tried to claim Walter and Helen weren't of sound mind, twisting their old age into a weapon. Each accusation felt like a slap, not just against me, but against the memory of the people I loved most. Every night I went home drained, my body heavy, my spirit stretched thin. I would sit at my desk, staring at Helen's letters, reading them over and over to remind myself why I was fighting. The war dragged on, leaving me exhausted, but I refused to let go. This wasn't just about money. This was about protecting Walter and Helen's love, their trust, and their final gift to me. I wasn't going to let anyone erase that, not even my own parents. For a while, it seemed like the tide was finally turning in my favor. With Helen's letters and the testimonies from my grandparents' friends, the judge was beginning to see that I wasn't the manipulator my parents painted me to. I could almost breathe again, almost believe the nightmare was finally easing. But then Diane and Robert struck their lowest blow. One morning in court, their lawyer announced they had new witnesses. The doors opened, and two people I had never seen before stepped inside. They claimed to be former caretakers of my grandparents. With calm, rehearsed voices, they swore that I pressured Walter and Helen, that I constantly asked them about their money, that I manipulated their decisions. Each lie felt like a knife. My chest tightened as I listened, my fingernails digging into my palms until it hurt. The judge scribbled notes while the jury's eyes shifted toward me, some skeptical, some unreadable. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout that none of this was true, but my voice was trapped in my throat. When the session ended, I stumbled outside, my strength crumbling. Maybe they're going to win, I whispered to Lily, my eyes brimming with tears. Maybe I should just give up. She grabbed my shoulders firmly, her gaze sharp and unwavering. No, listen to me, Sophia. They will destroy everything to win. That's who they are. If you give up now, you hand them the victory. Don't let them take what your grandparents gave you. Her words hit me harder than the lies in court. She was right. Walter and Helen had trusted me, not my parents. I couldn't let their last wishes be twisted and buried under false testimony. Marcus, ever calm, promised he would dig deeper. Something about those witnesses doesn't add up, he said, narrowing his eye. I'll find out what they're hiding. The next few days were tense, every court session a battlefield. I sat silently while more false stories piled up against me. I felt smaller with every accusation, but Marcus never wavered. He worked late into the nights, poring over documents, calling contacts, chasing threads of truth. Then came the moment everything shifted. In the middle of another hearing, Marcus stood and presented new evidence. He revealed that the so-called caretakers had never worked for Walter and Helen at all. Their employment records were forged, fake documents created to make their lies look credible. The courtroom went still. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge leaned forward, frowning deeply, as Marcus laid out the proof with sharp precision. The false witnesses stumbled over their words when questioned again, their stories collapsing like paper in the rain. I glanced at Diane and Robert. For the first time, their confidence cracked. Diane's face was flushed with anger, while Robert's jaw clenched as if he could barely contain his fury. Relief washed over me, so strong it brought tears to my eyes. For weeks, I had carried the weight of their lies. Now, in front of everyone, the truth was shining through. The court had seen their deceit, and my parents' lowest blow had backfired. The final day in court arrived like a storm I had been bracing for. My heart pounded as the judge shuffled through the papers in front of him. The entire room hushed in anticipation. I could feel my parents' eyes drilling into me from across the courtroom, but I kept my gaze steady on the judge, holding my breath. When he finally spoke, the words felt like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. This court finds no evidence of coercion or manipulation. The will of Walter and Helen Reynolds is valid and binding. The estate, in its entirety, belongs to Sophia Reynolds. For a moment, I couldn't move. The relief was so overwhelming it felt unreal. I gripped the edge of the table, tears blurring my vision. My grandparents' love had been defended, their wishes honored. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned a stern gaze toward Diane and Robert. Furthermore, this court has reason to believe fraudulent evidence was submitted. Forged documents and false testimony will not be ignored. The matter will be referred for investigation, and perjury charges may follow. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. I glanced toward my relatives, cousins, uncles, distant aunts, who had once looked at me with suspicion. Now their expressions had shifted to shock, some even shame. They finally understood the truth. Diane and Robert had built their case on lies, willing to destroy me to get what they wanted. As the gavel struck, sealing the decision, Diane shot up from her seat. Her face twisted in fury, her voice shrill as she screamed. "This isn't over. She stole it from us. She brainwashed them." Her words echoed in the chamber, desperate and unhinged. Robert followed, slamming his fist against the table. "You'll pay for this, Sophia. You'll regret crossing us." The bailiffs moved in quickly, stepping between them and the bench. The judge's face remained calm, though clearly displeased with their outburst. My parents fought against the officers, their voices rising, accusations flying wildly through the room. It was chaos, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I sat there, watching as they were escorted out, their screams fading into the hallway. A strange calmness spread through me. I had survived their cruelty, their lies, their schemes. They had tried to bury me under falsehoods, but in the end, the truth had stood taller. Around me, I could feel the shift. Relatives avoided Diane and Robert's empty threats, turning their eyes toward me with something like regret. A few even whispered apologies, though I couldn't bring myself to answer. The damage had already been done. As I walked out of the courthouse, Lily squeezed my hand, smiling proudly. You did it. They can't take anything from you now. I lifted my face to the sky, breathing in deeply. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. This victory was about reclaiming my dignity, about proving that Walter and Helen's faith in me had not been misplaced. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. After the court case ended, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever bond one had once hoped for with my parents was gone forever. Diane and Robert were no longer just difficult or selfish. They were toxic, dangerous, and cruel. So I cut them out of my life completely. No calls, no visits, no explanations. The silence between us became permanent. At first, it felt strange, like stepping into a life I didn't recognize. But slowly, the weight of their manipulation began to lift. For the first time, I had space to breathe, to think about what I wanted to do, not what anyone else demanded of me. And I knew exactly where to start. Walter and Helen had lived their lives giving quietly, never chasing recognition, but always leaving ripples of kindness wherever they went. I wanted their legacy to continue, so I used part of the inheritance to fund the things they cared about most. I donated to the animal shelter, where Helen used to volunteer every Saturday, ensuring it had the resources to expand and save more lives. I poured money into community centers, places where children could read, play, and feel safe the way I had always felt in my grandparents' home. And I set up scholarships in their names, giving young people a chance to study and build futures they might otherwise never have had. Word spread quickly, and soon the community began to see me not as the greedy girl my parents had painted in their lies, but as someone carrying forward Walter and Helen's spirit. Strangers stopped me in the library, thanking me with genuine smiles. Teachers sent letters from students who had received scholarships. The praise wasn't what I sought, but it warmed my heart to know that their love was still alive in the world through. Meanwhile, my parents' lives took a very different turn. The legal fees from the lawsuit drained them quickly, and the whispers about their fraud spread faster than wildfire. Once welcomed at every social event, Diane found doors closing on her, invitations drying up. Robert's business partners began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Their carefully polished reputation crumbled, leaving them exposed and humiliated. Debts piled up. I heard, through distant relatives, that they were selling off their belongings just to keep afloat. But even then, they never reached out to me, not with apologies, not with humility. Only silence. The same silence I had chosen. And yet, I never gloated. I never posted triumphant words or boasted about their downfall. Revenge wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about finding my own peace. I had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's living freely, living kindly, and refusing to let those who tried to break you hold power over your life. In the quiet of my grandparents' old garden, I finally felt that peace. My parents had lost everything they fought for, but I had something far greater. The strength to walk away and the freedom to live as Walter and Helen always wanted me to. The dust eventually settled, though my life would never be the same. My parents were gone from it entirely, not because they had passed away, but because they had chosen greed over love, lies over truth. I grieved them in a way, not for who they were, but for who I once wished they could have been. The truth was simple. I hadn't really lost parents, because they had never truly acted like parents in the first place. What I had lost, though, was the illusion that they cared for me. And strangely, that loss gave me freedom. Without their shadows looming over me, I could finally live in the light my grandparents had given me. Walter and Helen's love had been steady, unconditional, the kind that planted roots deep enough to outlast betrayal and cruelty. That was the love I chose to carry forward. I found myself returning often to their old home, walking the halls filled with memories. Every corner whispered of them, Walter's laugh echoing from the kitchen, Helen's soft humming drifting down the hallway. But my favorite place of all was the garden. They had poured so much of themselves into it, and it felt alive with their spirit. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and rose, I sat on the familiar wooden bench among the flowers. The scent of roses mixed with the faint memory of Helen's perfume, and I could almost see her beside me, hands folded neatly in her lap, smiling the way she always did when she looked at me. I thought back to something she had told me years ago, when I was still a little girl unsure of where I fit in the world. We had been sitting right here in this very spot when she leaned close and said, "You are the best of us, Sophia. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Her words returned now with a weight I hadn't understood as a child. Back then, I thought it was simply a sweet reassurance. Now, after everything, I realized it had been her truth. She had seen my strength before I ever did. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't the same tears of exhaustion and fear I had shed during the trial. These were lighter, softer, grateful tears. I whispered into the breeze, "I hope I'm making you proud." And deep in my heart, I felt the answer. I was. As I sat there, surrounded by the garden they had nurtured, I understood something that would guide me forever. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the people who pour their love into you, who teach you kindness, who stand by you when no one else does. Walter and Helen were my true family, and through their love, I had found the strength to build my own life. That, I realized, was the real inheritance, and it was worth more than $26 million could ever be. Do you believe Sophia made the right choice by cutting ties forever, or should she have given her parents another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you'll always know when a new one is here.